Okay. Hey, everybody. It's Jennifer. If you're joining me today, it is June 27th, 2023. And I have something that I'm accused of often. And this has come up again recently. And my guides are like, you know what? You need to just go in and talk about it. So I'm wondering how many of you are like, what is she talking about and what's going on? I'm sure there were a myriad of responses. I would love to know, for those of you that are in Zoom with me, if you would put in the chat, like, what did you first think of when you saw this? Because I would love to know what you guys saw when you saw, I'm often accused of this. And then you're like, you know what, I'm going to trust her and I'm going to go show up and be there. Or did you just come just to see what was going on? Because I really feel like this is something important to talk about. And I want to just quickly, if you guys are not, somebody says, what the heck, let me at him. So I have some wonderful people that have got my back. So I love you for that. Somebody else is like, I'm never available for the membership calls. I listen to the replays. So this is a perfect time. And I was available. So she jumped in. So thank you for that. I appreciate that as well. So thank you guys for just being here with me. I really appreciate it so much. And what we're going to talk about is literally something that I am accused of often. So some of you guys are new to me and some of you know me. Oh, what I was going to say before I got distracted by the comments was, if you're on Facebook and you're watching the replay of this on Facebook, or if you're in the Facebook, if you drop comments, I will check that later and come back. But if you want to join us on Zoom, you can still jump in. I'll be letting people on while we're on this call. And I don't know, it could be half an hour, it could be an hour. We're just going to see where it goes. Okay. So one of the things that I am accused of often, and I took notes, so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm checking my notes, because I wanted to get clear on what my guides wanted me to bring through today and why it's so important. So one of the things that I get accused of all the time is being overly optimistic. And sometimes I get accused of not being emotional enough. Now, it's an interesting thing. And I know you guys all know, one of the things that I talk about is it's really important to process our emotions. It's really important to do that. But at the same time, one of the things that is really important, and especially now, as we change into the frequencies and vibrations on the planet, something I always say is, whether you know it or not, the way you live your life and the way life is being lived is changing. And we've just got to expand with it, right? Like, I don't want to say roll with it, because it's not even really about rolling with it unless you're in the negative energy. And then it's like, it feels like you're maybe getting battered and beaten by life right now. And I totally understand that. But part of the reason it's so important to talk about this right now is life as we know it is changing. Like, there's no way, shape, or form anybody can ignore that, regardless of where they're at in their life, right? Like, if this is somebody who's not even into spirituality and they're just going about their daily life, things are changing the way that we live our life, right? So that is a standard across the board. Now, those of us that have the spiritual background, and for those of you that have been with me for a while, you know that this is part of a spiritual awakening, a spiritual ascension. And ascension simply means moving up, right? Ascension is going up in something. So as we're raising our vibration, as we're raising our understanding, we're raising our awareness to what is happening and what is available to us as a human on this planet experiencing this lifetime, right? So this being too optimistic can come in different ways. Now, part of this is because my guides for the longest time have told me to, and this goes back, you guys, I know my book is here somewhere. This goes back to my first book in 2015 that I wrote, which was Embodied Grace, A Woman's Path to Empowerment. And the most important chapter of the entire book is, what are you thinking? Like, if I didn't publish anything else and it was just that chapter is the most important thing, because it's all about what thoughts are playing in your mind, what is going on in the background of your mind, what are the thoughts that are on autopilot that you may not even realize, right? Like, this is the subconscious thing. So one of the things that's important is, just like we don't have to think about how we breathe, right? Because our body just naturally does that. The subconscious part of our brain does that for us. We don't have to consciously think, oh, I better breathe. You're going to breathe, right? So the same thing is true of our dominant programming and thoughts that are running in the background of our mind. So all those years ago, when I started doing this work for myself, one of the most important things for me was to change the pattern of thinking, because I had a pattern of thinking that is probably familiar to a lot of you. especially like whenever you first found me, found my book, found my group, whatever it is, there was probably a chance that you resonated at some point of that message, which is, what are the thoughts that you have going on in your head? What are the subconscious patterning, the soundtrack that's in your head that says things like, life is hard, you can never get ahead, there's never enough money, I'm never good enough, I'm never healthy enough, my house is never clean enough. Like there were so many of these things, you guys, that I had in the back of my mind, and they would play over and over and over. You know, some of them were, what makes you so special? That was one that used to pop in my head a lot, right? So the reason that I need to talk about it today is because if you've listened to the podcast, you've already heard, like I did 10 episodes on season 1, and it was all about spirituality. And the last one was about 3D into 5D. Like that's what the whole thing was about, was we're moving from the 3D paradigm of living life in a life is hard. You've got to work hard. You've got to do all the things. You got to climb the ladders. All of that was valid before. And that will still be valid for a portion of people who aren't really waking up. But I think everybody on some level is being shaken and being awakened to understanding that these thoughts and beliefs are actually something that you can choose to change. And that's what I really want to talk about today. And which is why some people think, and some people accuse me of being overly optimistic, because my guides and angels, when I started doing this work, they're like, okay, you have two choices. You can believe life is hard and it's going to suck forever, or you can choose to believe that life can be easier and you can choose to make changes and it'll be better. And that was really that's where I started. Do I want to believe life is shit from now on? Or am I going to change my mind and be like, okay, well, and honestly, you guys, this wasn't just an easy breezy thing, right? Like this is something you have to actually be like, wow, first of all, am I brave enough to believe that that's possible, right? Am I brave enough to believe that if I simply change my thinking, now I'm going to caveat here, it's not freaking easy. It's not easy to change your thoughts, but my mind was, okay, I can choose this or I can choose this. I trust my guides and angels, right? My guides and angels have been with me from day one. I've seen Jesus and the angels since I was a child. And I believe the things that are in the Bible. Now, again, I come from a Christian background. I believe in that. You do not have to believe in the Bible because there's so many other ancient texts that talk about the same thing. So you can reference any other books that you want. Some of them are completely scientific and they still talk about vibration and our thoughts creating reality. So it doesn't matter where you're at on that. But when I speak to it, I usually speak to it from a Christian background. So if those don't work for you, that's fine. Leave that part out. Listen to the rest, right? Like I never want to force anything on anyone. I want you to be brave enough to decide for yourself if you're willing to start thinking about things differently. Okay. So simply going back to, am I going to believe life is hard, or could I choose to believe that life could be easy if I learned different ways of thinking? That was the dichotomy that I was in. So I started choosing to believe, and I was always a little bit more, quote unquote, optimistic. Some people would say naive. I just always had kind of an outlook, like it could be worse, right? Like maybe it was because I was raised to look for the silver lining, even when everything's terrible, right? Like it's just kind of, yes, life was hard, but try to make the best of it, right? So maybe that was the saving grace for me, that there was this idea of, if I'm looking for the silver lining, right? But I had to believe more in the silver lining than in the everyday thing, right? And that is where the conscious choice of choosing what I decided to believe, think, and speak. So this is where that chapter of the book, What Are You Thinking, comes in so like imperative, because it's a really, it's not only strategic, but it is the fastest way to change your current reality. So if you're in a place where life is hard, you've got to change that. Like as long as you think that, and as long as you speak that, vibrationally speaking, this is us, because we're thinking it, and then because we speak it. The way my guides are showing me is that the vibration back in 3D didn't move nearly as quickly as the vibration as we're ascending into 5D. Right? I'm assuming everybody that's following me, you guys have already have some awareness of what this means to be in 3D reality versus 5D reality and 4D in between, right? Because we don't just skip over it. We've got to go through the whole process. So again, the podcast, the last episode talks about that. 3D into 5D talks about all of those different experiences and how those play out. But what I want to focus on right now is what my guides are saying is that it's much faster and a much quicker result than it would have been before. but you have to consciously decide. Those of you guys who are on the call, would you share with me like something that you know is a limiting belief that you still hear? I know a lot of us on this call have already done this work, but if there's anything, like every level comes with a new limiting belief to it. Like, and I'm doing that because you guys have seen I'm expanding my business. I've added a couple different products for you guys, or product lines, I should say. And so there's all these things that are coming in, and I'm like, okay, there's a new level and there's new things that are coming up. So I would like to try to work through some of those with you. But for example, life is hard. That's one that I think almost everybody can agree or like have resonate with on some level. On some level, somebody gets that, right? So one of the things that I had to start believing was, well, first of all, I had to start at least even remotely believing that life didn't have to be hard, right? Because I'm like, yeah, but it is hard. Like that is the reality. And it is until you start changing your thoughts and your beliefs. And this vibration, again, as we speak, like the more we speak, the faster it's coming. And my guides are showing me, like, if I could show you a visual of it, it's like, if you see a speaker and the sound waves that come out, like those used to take longer to get through 3D. Now they're like, boop, you know what I mean? Like it's happening in an instant. So saying life is hard, you have to first start to believe that you could want to shift that. Like, okay, well, it would be fun to believe that life isn't hard, but like, I need to see it. Well, you have to start believing it first. And this is another thing my guides came into. So believing before you see it is really contrary, right, to our human nature. Like that's something as humans, it's really hard for us. It was really hard for me back then. Looking back to 10, 15 years ago, it was really hard for me. But then I go back to when I was going through this myself, it was, the Bible teachings kept coming in going, well, but Jesus says it's a blessing to believe before we see it. So if he's saying that, like there's something to this, right? Now you could look at this from a law of attraction standpoint again, and not even look biblically, but regardless of if you're looking at spiritual laws or the Bible, everything says don't conform to this world, right? And I have a podcast episode on that. Like, so don't conform to this world, set your mind on things above. Even in Habakkuk, like this is something that, this is only a couple of years ago that I found this. It actually talks about creative visualization and journaling to create your reality. Like if you go read that again and actually look at the words and what it's saying, like it's talking about using the written and visuals to create your reality. So there's all these little like sprinkled in, like, I don't know, crumbs that if you follow all the crumbs, you start to understand that this is really like, they've been trying to tell us all the time, whether that's spirit guides or ascended masters or the great teachers of the past. And these old books, like one of the books that I'm re-listening to again is Secret of the Ages, right? It's from 1920 something, like, but it's such a powerful book. And all of these things are telling us these things over and over, like faith of a mustard seed, right? If we have just that much faith, you can do amazing things. The tiniest bit of faith can move mountains, right? Like there's all of these things. So we have to get past our human nature of not believing it to be true, and then start adjusting and then start speaking the reality that you want instead of the reality that you see. Now, this is where some people would say use affirmations, right? But affirmations, to me, I've always taught that a little bit differently, because if you're broke, and I use this example because I've experienced it. If you have 12 cents in your bank account, it's really hard to say I'm a millionaire and make that affirmation even remotely resonate. Right? Your body is going to reject that with everything in you. So what I started doing was with affirmations, I wouldn't say I am a millionaire. I would say I'm allowing myself to believe that I could have more money. I'm allowing myself to believe that God will provide everything I need. I'm allowing myself to learn more about money. I'm allowing myself to understand money better so that I can have more money. Like these were the things that I started working with. And that was what allowed me to then start building and having more financial, like abundance and financial freedom, because I spoke over it. So I would do praise and blessing over my checkbook every time I had to write my bills. And this was another trick that you could do, is writing as you do. I know I'm old school. I still do a checkbook, even though everything's online. So I'm just saying, even though my debit card's online, I still keep track of it in a regular register. And I balance the register to what's online just to make sure that we're all good, right? So as I'm doing that, I'm giving praise and blessing and saying, I'm so grateful to United Power for giving me electricity before I even paid for it, right? So you start doing little things like that. I'm so happy and grateful that I can pay the town for my water bill and they gave me a whole month of water before I even paid for it. Like those were the things that I started doing to start shifting some of the beliefs and some of the words that, the limiting beliefs that I had, and speaking words over it that would then fortify to create new patterns. Okay, so that's kind of the thing of what we're doing and why we start talking a little bit different. We want to give the energy and we want to speak it into existence, but we want to do so from a place that we can believe it, because if we can allow our energy to also expand with it, then we actually can start to create differently. But you have to choose, first of all, to break that thought and reframe the thought, right? So you're choosing to think something different. So anytime I would be I can't afford this, then I would say, wait, that's not true. I've got to look at this differently. How can I afford this? Is it really something I want to spend energy on trying to figure out how I can afford it, right? So even in the offhanded comments, like that's something I've tried to really break myself. Instead of saying I can't afford it, I've been saying, wait, do I really want to spend the energy it's going to take to create the money for what I want? Or does this not even really resonate with me? And so I'm just saying I can't afford it because I really don't want to spend the energy on it. Because if you do that, what's happening is you're saying I can't afford. So you're going to continue the pattern of lack, but then you're also not going to be like, you've got to be really conscious of how you're speaking, right? So don't say I can't afford it as an offhanded comment. And I have a whole nother thing about I can't afford it in the Facebook group. So if you haven't seen that video, there's a mini training on just that sentence of I can't afford it. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the comments. I'm not good enough. Oh my God, that was the theme track of my life, was I'm not good enough, right? So this is something that you have to break for yourself. And every time you have a thought that I'm not good enough, or I didn't do this right, or I'm stupid, or whatever, like however, because that I'm not good enough is going to come in a million different ways, right? So every time you have that thought, I'm not good enough, you've got to literally stop and say, wait a minute, why did I just think that? And how can I reframe that, right? So first, in the beginning for me, it was literally this, let's just break the pattern. Every time I would say, I'm not good enough, I'd say, wait, that's not true. I'm choosing to believe I'm good enough. And I wouldn't even dive into the why or what, because I just had to break it, right? So once you break the pattern, then it's a little bit easier to then go on and say, okay, this pattern's coming in. I know I've worked on this before. I've broken the pattern. So once you break the pattern, then when it comes in again and says, I'm not good enough, you can be, wait a minute, why is that coming up? Why is that still showing up for me? It gives you, once you break it, then the next time it comes up, it gives you the ability to then take a minute with it. And then that's where the healing comes, right? Because at that point, you're either going to say, oh, I remember this time when so-and-so said I wasn't good enough. So I'm going to forgive them and release them. I'm going to energetically clear that experience out of my system. I'm going to release and just let God clean this out, ask my angels to come in and do energy healing and clear out that memory that resonates with I'm not good enough, right? And you may have to do that over and over until you start to finally clear things out. The next piece to that is once you clear that out and do the forgiveness work to let that memory go, then you want to reinforce and you want to write down 3 reasons you are good enough, right? I am good enough because I'm a good person and I said hi to somebody that looked lonely in the grocery store. I'm a good person because somebody was short $3 on their grocery bill and I paid it forward, or I paid it forward in the Starbucks line, right? Like there's a million different things. I'm good enough because I do the laundry for my family. I'm good enough because God created me, right? Like, but whatever works for you. The whole thing about I'm not good enough for me came through an exercise I did. And I believe this was Louise Hay, and there was other teachers as well. And I had to tweak it because Louise Hay had this, I think it was like a mirror work exercise or something like that. Like somehow I came, and this was years ago, you guys, because I still remember I lived in the house in Keensburg, and I sold that in 2017. So this has been a while ago. And I know it was before I wrote my book, because I don't think I would have wrote my book before I had done this work. So it was the mirror work, and it was talking about looking in the mirror and seeing your eyes and saying, I am good enough to yourself. It is really hard. Like I could not look in the mirror and not look away. without, I just couldn't do it. So finally one day I was praying over it and I'm like, okay, obviously you guys meaning my guides and angels had brought this into my life and they were challenging me to do this work for myself. And I remember going, okay, you guys brought this mirror work to me. Like it's too hard. I can't do it. Like I'm really struggling. And I thought, you know what? I know Jesus loves me. Like I know God loves me. Like that is one thing that I can believe. I can believe that God loves me, right? With all my flaws, with all my mess ups, with everything I do wrong, I know God loves me. Like that's been ingrained in me from day one, right? So I went to the mirror this time, and instead of saying, looking in my own eyes, saying, I love you, I actually said, I just need a tiny glimpse of how God sees me. And I crumbled, you guys. I crumbled. Like I still get choked up. I remember this day because I had I crumbled into the bathroom floor and I cried and cried and cried because for that tiniest moment, I was like, oh my goodness, God made all of us as these divine, beautiful, brilliant beings. And every time I say I'm not good enough, I'm slapping him in the face. And that's what changed it for me. So it wasn't looking in my own eyes, it was seeing from a different perspective. And that literally changed everything for me. And from that moment, I still, as a human, I still have days where I'm like, that whole not good enough thing will come in, but I remember that, and that shifts me in a hurry, that I am good enough. And then it goes on to then believe that you're here on purpose. Like that's the next part of that, is I'm here on purpose. Okay. I don't deserve to succeed if I'm not always hustling, or I need a side hustle to succeed. So totally get that, because we've been raised to work our fingers to the bone, right? Like that's something that just came up the other day. It came up in my memories and I'm like, oh my God, I remember there's songs about it. There's songs about working your fingers to the bone. So working ourselves to the bone is an old 3D paradigm, but as long as you continue to believe it and operate from that frequency, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to need that side hustle, that second job, whatever it is, second stream of income to be able to make ends meet, right? And then the deserving to succeed comes with, you have to work hard, right? Because that is tied to your worthiness, right? Because you're not worthy if you're lazy. Like that's something that I know I've dealt with is, you know, you're lazy, which when you're like me and you have autoimmune, there are times when you need to quote unquote be lazy because you literally can't function, right? So you have to be able to be in that space of deserving to succeed only by working hard would be the limiting belief that I would work on to get through that. And then the idea of a side hustle, again, that's going to be like, you don't trust that you can make enough money with the job that you have. So that would be money beliefs that I would look at there. Let's see. Okay, I have this one. This is actually a really good one. I can't live on my own. Like I need somebody else. Like this has been mirrored in so many different ways. So most of the people I work with are women. I have had some men that I've coached, but mostly they're women. There's a lot of old, and this isn't even just, I mean, not only 3D paradigms, but there's a lot of generational programming around having to have a man to be able to survive. Right. So this actually would go back, not even just to our limiting beliefs, but this is like a survival instinct. My gut would be, not only do you do the work on the belief yourself. So anytime you get the belief, I can't live on my own, stop that belief, say that's not true. I can totally live on my own. And these are the reasons why. Right. And then the other part of that, I would go and get some generational clearing done, whether this is through Akashic records or ancestral healing, or, you know, an energy session, like whatever it is. And you guys know, you can book those with me. If you need a session to do an energy healing, that feels both to me. Not only does it feel like this is a belief that you're operating with, but it feels very generational. And it also feels beyond generational into women as a whole have experienced that. Because, you know, if you think back into, you know, like 300 AD, of course, that would have been a very real thing. It would be really hard to live as a woman on your own in that time frame. So not only is it generational throughout your family lineage, but also the paradigm as a woman on the planet. So it's both ancestral healing and generational healing and just paradigm as a woman as a whole. Okay. Okay. So somebody is like, had to run. Oh my God, this was so good. Thank you. So, all right. Is there any other questions so far, guys? Like, I feel like I want to go into the idea of the being overly optimistic is kind of the main thing, because I really want you to understand the reason that I am quote unquote overly optimistic is because I've learned that by being in that vibrational frequency of believing that good things can happen, good things happen. And the more I believe it, the more good things happen, right? And this is true in all of it. This is true in relationships. This is true in money. This is true in love and friendships and family and experiences and travel. I mean, you can literally go across the board of when you believe good things can happen, when you can be, and it's not a fake optimism either. Like, that's the other thing. Like, fake it till you make it does not work when it comes to manifesting. You have to do the work behind it to allow yourself to believe it, right? Which is where all the hard work comes in. And this is where, you know, you can see people talking about like instant manifestation. The good thing is it's quicker. Like the healing process right now is way quicker than it was like 10 years ago when I first started this. The healing can happen so much faster. So it looks like instant manifestation, but I almost could guarantee anybody that looks like they're having instant success or instant manifestation has probably been doing work behind the scenes for quite a while. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm getting nods and yeses. For those of you on Facebook, I'm sorry, I don't see the comments, but I will come back to them. Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions about what's going on? And if not, I want to go into the second part of this, which is being accused of not being emotional enough. So the not being emotional enough is part of what I talk about when my guides talk about radical responsibility. And they always talk about radical responsibility. They talk about discernment, and they talk about divine sovereignty. And part of the radical responsibility is learning when to learning how to respond versus react. Now, I'm still human, guys. I still react sometimes. Like, there's still sometimes where I just have a knee-jerk reaction, and you know, just then I look back and go, why did I react like that? That was crazy, right? My Achilles heel, I know, is always when I'm worn out, when I'm too tired, or if I don't feel good. Like, and those are usually not mutually exclusive. They're usually all together. Usually it's if I haven't gotten enough sleep or haven't gotten good enough sleep, then I know that I have to have a little bit more awareness around self-care and awareness around how I react to things, because when I'm worn out, I won't react as well as I will when I'm well rested, right? So self-care, self-awareness all comes into play when it comes into the emotions. But one of the things that my guides taught me very early on is that our emotions are only like guide signs, like street signs or like directions, right? Like, when your emotions are way out of control, then that's a sign for you that you don't feel stable, you don't feel solid, something's going on, and you need to get back into divine alignment, right? Usually there's some kind of fear with it. There's all different things that it can be, but learning your emotions through self-awareness and radical responsibility is, again, the next power. I think the thoughts are the first most powerful thing you can do. The second thing is your emotions. And this is because, again, because we're vibrational, if you're reacting with these explosive emotions, you're going to get explosive experiences around you that keep you off kilter. But when you can have enough self-awareness to say, okay, that really triggered me, and now I'm feeling upset, instead of like immediately being triggered and immediately jumping back and getting in somebody's face, right? If you can go, woo, I felt that just triggered me. Like, what does this mean? Why is this upsetting me? What's going on? Because almost undoubtedly something else in the beliefs or in the paradigm or in your past experiences is adding to that emotional reaction. So what my guides taught me early on is, instead of reacting, learn to respond. And the only difference between reacting and responding is that tiny little second of going, whew, okay, that hit. Why is this hitting me? Right? So it gives you a moment to center yourself, tune into your heart. And then the spiritual piece of this is, can I look at this from a spiritual perspective? And how do I want to react to the situation instead of just blowing up and responding? Does that make sense? All right. Do you guys have any questions on that? Okay. If there's not any questions, those are the things I really wanted to talk about today and what my guides were like, because I just got accused of this recently. You're so optimistic and you're always doing these things. And I'm like, because life is fun. Like I want everybody to have fun and life is fun. So the being too optimistic is, again, that's a mindset, right? Like, can somebody really be too optimistic? It'd be different if I was optimistic and not realistic, right? Like I still understand everything that's going on in the world. I still understand that not everything is always going to be roses and sunshine, but now I can take a step back from that and decide, how do I want to respond to this? Where do I choose to put my focus? One of the things that I always say, and those of you guys that are in the membership with me, you hear me say this all the time. If you're called to advocate for something, that's going to be your main focus. And that may not be something that's great. Like if you're advocating for women's health, you're going to see a lot of things that are wrong for women's health, but you're going to be more powerful in doing something about it if you can look to the objective of what would help it instead of what the problems are. Right now, I'm not really, I do have women's health, but it's not my main focus. So I'm not going to see as much of that as somebody else who's in it, right? The same thing. If you're an advocate for, animals, you're going to see a lot more of what's wrong. But instead of focusing on what's wrong, the more powerful thing to do is focus on how could we remedy this? How could we make it better? Right? So again, you're choosing your focus. So that's where being optimistic comes in. It's not that you're ignoring all the things that are quote unquote wrong. It's that you're seeing the issue, the problem, the thing that needs to be rectified, and you're focusing on how do I make this better instead of look at all this shit, right? So that's the focus, is how do you, that's where the optimism comes from. It's not that you want to go around life in la la land and up, one of the things I always say is it's not always sunshine, roses, and unicorn farts. Like there's stuff that's not that great, but the key is don't focus on the things that aren't that great. Focus on how can you make things better. And at the same token, if something is not great in your life, you've got to take the time to process it. I just spent all day Saturday in bed grieving and crying and processing, and it was for something outside of me that happened, but also it affected me. Those of you in the Facebook group, you saw that my aunt and uncle lost everything in a tornado, like absolutely everything got wiped out. But that was not only grieving for them because of what they are going through, but also grieving for me because I have so many memories there. Right. So you can't, but at the same time, okay, like this just goes to show you, my uncle was, and aunt were, interviewed on the news, and he goes, it hurts your spirit a little, but we can rebuild. I mean, so that's a good way. Like there's things happen in life. You can't ignore it, and you've got to process it, and you've got to honor what you're feeling and what you're going through. But at the same token, are you going to focus on everything that's wrong, or are you going to focus on what's right? And again, you have to have the time in between where you allow yourself to feel the emotions, allow yourself to journal it out if that's what works for you. If you dance and cry and listen to music and that's how you process, do that. If you're somebody that goes to the gym and you work out really hard and you process it through that way, allow yourself to process it that way. Like the thing is to, again, come back into that divine sovereignty and your own radical responsibility. What is the best way? What is the self-awareness that you have that says, this is how I process energy and this is what I need to do? Sometimes for me, it's all of those things, right? Sometimes it's get on a treadmill. Sometimes it's lift heavy weights. Sometimes it's go for a swim. Sometimes it's cry it out, right? Sometimes it's journal it. Sometimes it's whatever. Like you've got to allow yourself to process it. You can't ignore it. You can't suck it up. You can't pretend like it's not real. You have to actually acknowledge it and process it. And then now what? Right? So it's that whole process of the beliefs about it, the way you're going to react and respond to it, allowing yourself to process the emotion, and then still having that, how do I make the world a better place? Because that's what we're all here for. Right? Okay. So I think that's all that I wanted to say for today. I feel like I want to pull a card really quick to wrap this up. Do you guys have any other questions before we get ready to wrap this up? I hope this was helpful today. Go ahead. Yep.
So Just wanted to say that when I was journaling a couple weeks ago, my angels just helped me channel something. And it's everything that I do in every session that I have with somebody doing a reading or Reiki or mediumship is the word hope. And an acronym for that is helping others process emotions. So when you were talking about all that, I was like, oh, the hope thing.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. Okay, so I know you're kind of new to the community because we just met in October, right? And so you might appreciate this because it goes along with what you were just saying. I can't remember how long ago it was, but I just channeled some information about the word hope and what it originally meant. That would be really positive, and it totally like goes along with what you just said. So I love that. Would you also, in the Facebook group Embody Grace community, would you please drop that? Do you mind sharing that in the
No,
group?
I don't mind at all.
Yeah, if you would post that, would be fantastic. I would love that. Okay, anybody else have any questions or anything before we? Okay, so I'm just going to ask for a card to kind of, seal up the energy around this session today. Again, thank you guys for showing up with me with this one. Okay. Okay. Okay, I love this, you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna use, this is Radley's deck, of course. So Guardian Angel Messages Tarot from Radley Valentine. And the first one I got is the Ten of Fire, which is basically saying if you're overworked, right? Like this is all the stuff we just talked about. Like, what are you thinking? Are you thinking life is hard? Because this is what this card is showing us. I mean, look at her. She's exhausted. She's got a million things to do. This would be like, okay, so this sounds really silly, but this is probably me channeling a little bit of Radley because I know he loves like all the Disney stuff. And I'm instantly hearing like whistle while you work. Isn't that the Seven Dwarfs? Is that the ones that sing that? So this would be where, okay, I have this actually is really good. So I remember when I first started this work, had kiddos at home, my husband, God love him. And I can remember being like, oh, it's Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. So the whistle while you work. If you can be happy when you're working, it changes everything. So I'm going to share because this is, I mean, obviously there's a ton of housework, right? So I got to where when I had a lot of things like that to do, again, being in that negative mindset, I could bitch and moan about all the housework. This house is always dirty. There's always stuff everywhere. Like I've always got dishes in the sink. Nobody puts their clothes away, blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, has anybody else done that? Or am I the only one guilty of that? Because I've done it. Right. So when I started playing around with this idea of, okay, my guides are bringing me all this stuff about like Wayne Dyer wishes fulfilled, like all of this stuff came flooding in me. Right. The first thing I learned was boundaries, but that's besides the point. So when I start getting onto this manifestation thing, one of the first things that I started practicing this with was my housework. I thought if I can shift my mindset around all of the housework, this would be a game changer, right? And I was like, it's worth a try. Like, let's try it, right? So anytime I would start to get in that complaining voice about the mess, I would be like, you know what? I am so glad that I have my children and that they're here and they're happy and they're healthy and they've been fed. And I started, and the same thing, I'm so glad that my husband and I actually do love each other. Like I get mad that he leaves his socks on the floor, but at least, we have really good time together most of the time. So I can choose to like focus on the socks, or I can choose to focus on, he just took me to dinner, or we used to have date night on the patio. So we would go out and have, after the kids went to bed, we would go out and look at the stars in the summer and have a date night on the patio. So I would think of those things instead, right? So I started doing that dialogue around the housework. And it started shifting everything. I got to where I didn't hate doing housework anymore. And then eventually I ended up getting a housekeeper, which was even better. But like I had to shift my own focus around that first, right? And then what they're saying next is we've got to have patience, and we've got to know that what we invest in, we've got to give it time, right? So how I feel like this is showing up for this message is, if you're investing by doing all the work, right? You can see all of these gold things on the tree. the angels are supporting you and believing these new things and putting these new hopes out and putting these new beliefs out. But you can't expect the harvest to be tomorrow if you just watered the tree yesterday. Do you know what I mean? So give yourself a little bit of patience, assess the thoughts that you have, and then know that if you do this work, your investment will come back, right? The more you invest in yourself and you're working towards the manifestation and creating a life you love, you will get that. You will reap the rewards of your investment later, but you've got to give yourself the time to let that process through. Yeah, that feels really good, you guys. I really like that. I'm gonna do one more. 𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 map. I love her map deck because I feel like it always gives us a little bit of guidance on what to do next. So I'm going to ask what would be something good for them to hear as we leave this call, because I always like everything to be actionable, right? Like I want you guys to leave this so that when you're done with this call, you're like, okay, this is something I can do. Oh, of course, it's the goblins. Luckily, it came up reversed, but you guys, are you guys familiar with this deck? This one's about the goblins in your head saying the negative Nelly stuff. So you can, I feel like what it's saying is, since it came up reversed, it's saying you can defeat the goblins in your mind and have a different outlook on things. I'm just going to look really quick because I don't know her deck that well. Oh, it's often difficult to deal with someone else's issues because they impact your own. No one is perfect, but in this case, you're particularly vulnerable to being manipulated by others. So this is good. This is actually so this goes back to what I was just saying. I get accused of being optimistic, right? I get accused of being optimistic. So I can choose to believe that, or I can choose to be like, well, they can think that if they want, but I'm still going to be optimistic. Does that make sense? That's what I feel like that card is. So be careful what the people are around you saying, because that will also impact. So since we just had this call, and if you're like, okay, I'm going to start working on my thoughts and I'm going to be positive, be prepared, because chances are somebody's going to be negative Nelly and they're going to want to pull you down with them. So there's that. Right? All right, my friends. Well, thank you for joining me today. Let me know if you have any questions about this. And thanks for joining me on such a last minute, hey, I'm going to show up today and we're going to do this thing that my guys are telling me to talk about. So thank you guys for being here today. I hope this was a helpful class or workshop. I don't even know what to call when I get these downloads. I hope this was a good call today. So thank you guys a lot. We'll see you next time.